They say the most chilling truths often hide in the places we trust the most. For Elena Moreau Sinclair, that truth unraveled on a quiet morning, wrapped in what she believed was a perfect life. She was glowing, 5 months pregnant, adored by her billionaire husband, and eagerly anticipating their child's arrival. But fate has a cruel way of rewriting fairy tales. One forgotten phone, a quick trip back home, and suddenly, she stood on the threshold of a nightmare she never saw coming. Her husband, Julian Sinclair, a tech tycoon celebrated for his cutting-edge innovations, had always been the devoted partner. At least, that's what she thought. Their marriage had been built on whispered promises, stolen kisses, and dreams of a future filled with love. But the moment Elena stepped back into their sleek Manhattan penthouse, she saw a truth that shattered her world. There he was, locked in an intimate embrace with her own sister-in-law, Camille. The woman Elena had trusted like family. A sharp breath caught in her throat, the weight of betrayal pressing down like an avalanche. Her hand instinctively cradled her belly, as if shielding her unborn child from the wreckage of her crumbling reality. That morning had started with such promise. Sunlight poured through their floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden hues across the modern apartment. Elena had woken up feeling at peace, savoring the quiet flutter of life inside her. The world outside was moving fast, but for a moment, she allowed herself to revel in the warmth of anticipation. Julian had already been at the kitchen island, immersed in emails, his signature furrowed brow betraying the weight of his billion-dollar empire. "You need to relax," Elena teased, pouring herself a glass of water. "Our baby can sense stress, you know." His expression softened as he pulled her into a gentle embrace, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I'll try," he murmured, "but my CFO just flagged some major issues in Hong Kong. I may need to fly out next week, right before your baby shower." Elena had rolled her eyes playfully. "Work, work, work. Even our baby is going to think your laptop is part of the family." They laughed, but deep down, a flicker of disappointment settled in her chest. She had learned to share Julian with his work, to place second to the demands of his empire. But she never imagined she'd have to share him with another woman, let alone someone from her own family. As she stood frozen in the doorway now, watching Camille trail her manicured fingers along Julian's chest, the air left Elena's lungs. It was surreal, a cruel trick of the universe, a moment that shouldn't exist in her perfect life. Her phone, the reason she had returned home, lay forgotten on the counter. A meaningless object in a room filled with unspeakable betrayal. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears as Julian turned, his expression shifting from shock to guilt. "Elena," his voice barely carried across the space between them. But there were no words that could fix this. "Not now. Not ever. If you're a billionaire, it's never enough, is it?" Julian chuckled, leaning back in his chair. Elena smirked, shaking her head. "You always say it's not about money." "It's not," he admitted. "It's about the challenge, seeing these projects through. But don't worry, I'll move mountains to be at the baby shower. If I missed it, my mother would never let me hear the end of it." His mother, Cassandra Sinclair, had always been an intimidating presence, sharp-tongued, sophisticated, and unapologetically traditional. She had never truly accepted Elena, who came from a modest background, but Elena had spent years carefully navigating their tense relationship, always choosing peace over confrontation. Before she could reply, her phone buzzed from across the kitchen. She walked over and glanced at the screen. Amélie Moreau, her sister-in-law. Elena hadn't spoken to Amélie in weeks. Amélie and her husband, Mark Moreau, had been traveling abroad, and though they lived just a short drive away, their schedules never seemed to align. Elena quickly texted back, "At my doctor's appointment. I'll call you later." She had no idea that Amélie was about to become an unexpected part of the biggest betrayal of her life. Julian kissed her on the cheek before she left, promising again he wouldn't miss the baby shower. Elena smiled, feeling lucky. At least, that's what she thought at the time. She drove toward Dr. Rosalind's clinic, humming along to the radio, blissfully unaware that she had left her phone sitting on the kitchen counter next to her half-finished glass of water. At the clinic, Elena found herself flipping through outdated magazines in the waiting area. Across from her, another pregnant woman, looking exhausted, kept checking her phone. Instinctively, Elena reached for hers, only to realize with a jolt that it wasn't there. Her mind immediately retraced her steps. Had she left it in the car? She rummaged through her purse, ignoring the curious glance from a father-to-be sitting nearby. Nothing. A small wave of irritation passed through her, but it was quickly overshadowed by a more pressing worry. What if she missed an important call? Still, she reminded herself it was likely just at home. She had a habit of setting it down near the kitchen before heading out. The nurse called her name, pulling her focus back to the appointment. Dr. Rosalind measured her belly, listened to the baby's heartbeat, and asked the usual questions. How was she feeling? Was she taking her prenatal vitamins? Any unusual discomfort? Elena answered everything with calm confidence, reassured by the normalcy of it all. For a moment, she let the missing phone slip from her thoughts. But that tiny, nagging feeling in the back of her mind wouldn't quite disappear. As soon as the checkup was done, Elena decided to swing by the penthouse before heading to brunch with her best friend, Clara Rousseau. She only needed to grab her phone, just a quick stop, in and out. The drive home was filled with quiet thoughts about how much her life had transformed. A few years ago, she had met Julian at a charity fundraiser during college. He had been an ambitious scholarship student while she was studying social work. Their connection had been instant, built on a shared love for philanthropy. Over time, Elena watched Julian's meteoric rise in the business world. She remembered late-night talks about traveling the globe and building schools in underserved communities. And despite his growing empire, he had stayed true to that passion, donating millions to charities, funding humanitarian projects. That unwavering generosity was one of the reasons she had fallen in love with him. Pulling into her usual parking spot, Elena waved at the security guard in the lobby, who greeted her with a polite nod. Everything about her life seemed so polished from the outside. A stunning home, a billionaire husband, a baby on the way. As she rode the elevator up to the penthouse, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirrored walls. She still looked radiant, glowing with pregnancy. But there was something else. A hint of tension in her eyes, a feeling she had dismissed as hormones. The elevator doors slid open onto their private entrance. Stepping inside, she expected the familiar hum of her phone vibrating on the kitchen counter. Instead, she heard hushed voices. At first, she assumed Julian was on a business call, but then she recognized a distinctly feminine voice. She froze. There was something about the way the voices intertwined, something conspiratorial, urgent. Her breath caught as unease slithered down her spine. Without thinking, she slipped off her shoes, moving silently across the marble floors. Step by careful step, she followed the voices toward the open living space. The penthouse was designed to be vast and open, with no doors to conceal conversations. Every whisper carried, and what she heard next made her blood run cold. "You can't keep doing this, Julian," the woman's voice trembled. "What if Elena finds out?" Elena's stomach twisted violently. She knew that voice. Elena Moreau, her sister-in-law. Confusion crashed over her like a tidal wave. Why was Emily here? And why did she sound so afraid? She gripped the wall, forcing herself to stay steady. Whatever was happening in that room was not meant for her ears. But now there was no turning back. Julian exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. His voice was low, almost pleading. "Emily, I'm doing what I have to do. You should know that by now." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. Why was he speaking in such an intimate tone? And why? Why was her sister-in-law standing so close to him? She took a step forward, peering around the corner. The sight before her made her blood run cold. Emily stood inches from Julian, her sleek black dress hugging every curve. Her face was drawn with tension, lips parted as if struggling to speak. Julian looked torn, conflicted in a way that sent a sickening wave of dread through Elena's stomach. Then, Emily lifted a trembling hand and placed it gently against Julian's chest. He didn't push her away. Instead, he let his fingers settle lightly over hers. Elena's breath hitched. 1,000 thoughts crashed into each other, none forming a rational explanation. Was this an affair? Had Julian, the man she had built a life with, the father of her unborn child, betrayed her with her own family? A wave of nausea rolled through her, but it wasn't the pregnancy this time. Her foot slipped slightly on the polished marble floor, the soft squeak cutting through the charged silence like a gunshot. Julian and Amelie's heads snapped toward her in unison. Their faces, mirrors of shock. Elena stood frozen, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Time fractured. The world around her seemed to blur, her vision narrowing to only them, to the horrifying intimacy of their closeness. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Amelie reacted first. She jerked away from Julian as if burned, her eyes darting to Elena's, wide with something. Guilt? Fear? Both? Elena. Her voice cracked. This isn't what it looks like. But wasn't it? Julian, always so controlled in boardrooms and under pressure, looked utterly lost, his expression a mess of alarm and regret. I didn't expect you home so soon. His words tumbled out, weak and meaningless, as if that changed anything. He took a step forward, but Elena's hand shot up, palm out. Don't. The single word came out as a whisper, but it carried all the force of a scream. Her chest rose and fell erratically. Her heartbeat drummed an ominous rhythm, the kind that heralded something breaking, something irreparable. She was carrying his child, and now she was carrying the weight of his betrayal. Amelie swallowed hard, searching for words, but nothing could fix what had already shattered. Let me explain. Elena let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Explain what? Her voice was louder than she expected, trembling with fury. I just walked in on my husband and my brother's wife looking closer than in-laws should ever be. What on earth could possibly explain that? Tears welled in Amelie's eyes. She turned to Julian, silently pleading for him to speak first. But he didn't. He just stood there, guilt carved into every tense line of his face. Rage surged through Elena, burning hotter than the heartbreak threatening to pull her under. She had always trusted Julian. She had confided in Amelie about her marriage, her fears, her excitement about the baby. Now that trust lay in ruins, shattered by betrayal on both sides. This wasn't just infidelity, it was deception from the two people she should have been able to rely on the most. A wave of dizziness hit her, her pregnancy amplifying every emotion. The room tilted slightly and she stumbled. Julian reacted instantly, reaching for her. Don't touch me, she gasped, jerking away. If you do, I swear I'll scream. Her voice was raw, shaking, but full of warning. Julian froze mid-step. Amelie flinched, her fingers twisting together. Elena, please, I swear I never wanted you to find out this way. I love Mark, you have to believe me. Her words only fueled Elena's fury. You love Mark? She spat. Then why are you meeting my husband in private like this? She gestured wildly between them, her hands trembling. How dare you? Amelie opened her mouth, but no words came out. Elena felt the tightness in her chest worsen. She forced herself to inhale slowly, then a movement, tiny and fluttering. The baby. A sob caught in her throat. She was standing here, confronting the signs of an unfaithful husband while carrying his child. Somehow that thought grounded her. She straightened, forcing the storm inside her to settle just enough to make her next words clear. I deserve an explanation. Julian swallowed hard. Elena, it's complicated. Then start from the beginning. Her voice was steel. Because if you don't, I'm walking out of here, and I might never come back. The weight of her words hung between them. Julian's eyes flickered to her belly, and for a moment something like pain crossed his face. Amelie stood deathly still, her face drained of color. Finally, Julian sighed, raking a hand through his hair, and then he began to speak. This is going to sound unbelievable, Julian warned, his voice low. But please, just hear me out. He motioned for them to move to the living room, but Elena didn't budge. She stood rooted to the spot, arms crossed protectively over her belly. Amelie lingered near the edge of the room, her gaze darting between them, her hands clenched at her sides. Fine, Julian exhaled. Stand if you want, but let me talk. He began with a cryptic explanation about family secrets, debts of honor, and betrayals buried decades ago. He spoke about his late father, Elliot Sinclair, who had died in a suspicious car accident. There are things about my family, things I was never meant to uncover, Julian admitted. My father was involved in dealings that went far beyond business. He had alliances with men who would do anything to protect their interests. Elena's stomach twisted, confusion mounting. And what does any of this have to do with Amelie? She demanded. Julian hesitated, then looked at Amelie. That's where it gets complicated. Elena's pulse quickened. Amelie's father was Richard Moreau, Julian finally revealed. Elena's brow furrowed. Richard Moreau? Amelie had rarely spoken about her father. He had died years ago, well before she met Mark. Julian exhaled. Richard Moreau and my father were deeply entangled in business. When I took over Sinclair Enterprises, I discovered that they had co-invested in projects that weren't entirely legal. Elena's breath hitched. Illegal? What kind of business? Julian's jaw tightened. Deals with dangerous people. People who don't forget debts. A chill crept down Elena's spine. My father died under mysterious circumstances, Julian continued, and a few months later, Amelie's father disappeared. Everyone assumed he was dead. But before he vanished, they left behind a tangled mess of obligations, one that now ties Sinclair Enterprises to powerful stakeholders. Elena's mind spun. So Amelie is, what? A link to her father's past? Julian didn't answer right away. Amelie stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he disappeared, my father left me a letter. Elena's heart pounded. In it, he told me that if I was ever in danger, I should find Julian Sinclair. That he would know what to do. Elena let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Protection? That's what I walked in on? Because from where I stood, it sure didn't look like a protection detail. Amelie's lips trembled. It's not like that. I was terrified, Elena. I think my father's old partners have found me. I didn't know who else to turn to. She took a shaky breath. I didn't want to drag Mark into this, so I came to Julian instead. I thought Julian would keep it secret and help me handle the situation, Amelie whispered, her voice unsteady. Julian nodded. That's why we were meeting in private. I didn't want you to worry, Elena. You're pregnant. You shouldn't be under this kind of stress. He reached out, his fingers barely brushing her arm, but Elena stepped back, glaring at him. She wanted, desperately, to believe this wild explanation, to trust that this was all some tangled family matter. But the scene she had walked in on wouldn't leave her mind. You can't keep doing this. What if Elena finds out? That wasn't the language of business secrets. That wasn't the way people spoke about hidden family ties or cryptic letters. Elena's gaze shifted between Julian and Amelie. That still doesn't explain the way you were holding each other. Her voice was sharp, demanding. The way you touched him, Amelie. That's not how someone asks for protection. A heavy silence filled the room. Amelie's eyes dropped to the floor. I was emotional, she murmured. Julian was just trying to calm me down. I was shaking. I grabbed him. I was scared. Her voice wavered, thick with something. Guilt? Shame? Elena wanted to accept that explanation. She wanted to believe there was a logical reason for everything. But something deeper gnawed at her, a whisper in the back of her mind warning her that not everything had been said. The house suddenly felt colder. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring at the two people she had once trusted with her whole heart. And yet, she no longer knew what to believe. Julian's explanation made sense, on some level. He had often hinted at a complicated family history. Amelie's distress was real. Still, Elena couldn't erase the image of her sister-in-law placing a trembling hand on Julian's chest, the way they had stood close, as if sharing something unspoken. Julian cleared his throat. I understand why you're upset. I should have told you, Elena, but I wanted to protect you. And protect Mark, too. Amelie asked for my discretion. A bitter taste filled Elena's mouth. So you're telling me there's no affair? That this is all some cloak and dagger business about your father's past? She searched Julian's face for any flicker of dishonesty. His expression was pained but unwavering. Amelie nodded quickly, her eyes pleading. I love Mark. I would never betray him. You have to believe me. Mark. The mention of her older brother twisted something deep inside Elena. They had grown up together, fought through childhood hardships, protected each other. Could she really stand here and accuse Amelie of destroying that trust? And yet, doubt lingered. Mark had introduced her to Amelie with so much pride, telling Elena she was finally getting the sister she never had. Now standing here, suspecting Amelie of an affair, of betraying marriage loyalty, felt like a double-edged wound. And yet, the moment she had walked in on was impossible to ignore. She clenched her fists, struggling to control the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. A wave of nausea rolled over her, making her unsteady. She needed answers. Real ones, not half-truths wrapped in secrecy. Taking a shaky breath, she gestured toward the sleek leather sofas. If you two expect me to believe this is about protecting Amelie from some buried threat, then you'd better tell me everything, without leaving anything out. Julian let out a quiet sigh of relief and moved to guide Elena to the sofa, helping her settle against the soft cushions. Amelie perched at the farthest end, her body rigid, her tear-rimmed eyes refusing to meet Elena's. Julian sat in an armchair across from them, the vast city skyline casting faint reflections against the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. His expression was careful, measured. "About 2 months ago, I received an envelope with no return address," Julian began. Inside was a cryptic note referencing Sinclair Enterprises' past. It also mentioned a sealed contract with my father's and Richard Moreau's signatures. Elena's heart pounded. "I didn't know what it meant," Julian continued, "but it suggested that if I didn't comply with certain demands, both my family and the company would suffer." Elena listened, her skepticism easing, if only slightly. Sinclair Enterprises was massive, and there had always been whispers about questionable deals made long before Julian took over. She even remembered him mentioning once in passing that his father's death had been clouded by rumors of sabotage. "I started digging," Julian said, his voice edged with something unreadable. "It led me to an off-site storage facility my father used. That's where I found references to Amelie's father, Richard Moreau." Elena swallowed hard. The documents indicated that their partnership was linked to dangerous people, money laundering, illegal arms. It wasn't entirely clear, but it was enough to make me realize this was serious. Amelie finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Around the same time, I started noticing strange things. Letters about my father showing up in my mailbox, strangers watching me when I went shopping." She took a shaky breath. "That's when I finally opened my father's letter. The one where he told me that if I was ever in danger, I should find Julian Sinclair. That he was the one person I could trust." Elena's heart twisted. It all sounded terrifyingly real. And yet, the memory of their closeness, the way Amelie had touched Julian, still clung to her mind like an unshakable shadow. "So why keep it from me?" Elena's voice cut through the heavy silence. "I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. I have a right to know." Julian met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Because I didn't want to drag you into this. Not while you're pregnant. I love you, Elena. I was trying to shield you." She wanted to believe him, to let down the wall she had instinctively thrown up, but the memory of what she had seen burned fresh in her mind. "And yet, the day I walk in, I see Amelie touching you like that," she challenged, her tone sharp. Amelie inhaled sharply. "I swear, Elena, that was me having a breakdown. Julian was only trying to comfort me." Elena folded her arms tightly across her chest. "That's it?" Both nodded, though their nervous energy betrayed them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Elena forced herself to take slow, deep breaths. She could feel the tension in her body, the way her unborn child reacted to every tremor of her emotions. She couldn't afford to lose control, not now. After what felt like an eternity, she exhaled shakily. "I need time to process this." She pushed herself to her feet, though her knees wobbled beneath her. "Amelie, you say you love Mark. If that's true, you need to tell him something soon. I won't keep this from my brother." Panic flickered in Amelie's eyes. "We planned to," she insisted. "But we needed to figure out a plan first. The fewer people who know, the safer we'll all be." Julian stood as well, his posture tense, his voice edged with quiet desperation. "I know this is overwhelming, but believe me, I had no bad intentions." He hesitated, then stepped forward. "Let me prove it to you. I'll show you everything. The letters, the documents, all of it. Just trust me." The word trust rang hollow in Elena's ears. She looked at both of them, her gaze unwavering. "I don't know if I do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But for now, I'll listen. Only for the baby's sake." Her words lingered as she reached for her phone on the kitchen table. There it was, right where she had left it. Without another glance at Julian or Amelie, she turned and walked out. Her heart felt too raw, her mind too clouded by the shock and emotional betrayal to stay in that house a second longer. She didn't even realize where she was going until she found herself parked at an overlook on the outskirts of the city. The engine hummed softly as she stared blankly at the horizon. In the distance, traffic rumbled faintly, the wind rustling through the trees lining the bluff. Hot, stinging tears welled in her eyes. And this time, she didn't fight them. She remembered how Julian used to bring her to places like this when they were younger, scenic spots where they could watch the sunset and dream about their future. Now the endless sky above felt cruelly indifferent, a silent witness to the turmoil unraveling inside her. Elena pressed a hand to her belly. A soft flutter responded beneath her palm. The baby. No matter how shattered she felt, she wasn't alone. She had to be strong. Her phone buzzed in the cup holder. Probably a message from Julian. She couldn't bring herself to check it. Not yet. Her thoughts spun back to what she had witnessed. The closeness, the whispered words. Julian and Amelie's explanation made sense in a twisted way. If Amelie was truly in danger because of her father's criminal past, it was logical that she would turn to Julian for help. But if that was true, why the secrecy? Why not tell Elena, her own sister-in-law? Why risk her walking in on a scene that looked like an open betrayal? She inhaled shakily. The obvious answer was that they didn't want to drag her into something dangerous. But another, darker possibility slithered into her mind. What if this wasn't just about protecting Amelie? What if what she saw was the start of something deeper, an emotional affair, growing in the shadows of shared secrets and stress? The thought made her shudder. She gritted her teeth, forcing it away. Her phone buzzed again. She tapped the screen, revealing a missed call and a text from Julian. "Please come home. Let's talk. I love you." Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. Despite everything, she still loved him. She had never questioned that until today. But love and trust in a relationship were not the same thing. The screen lit up again. This time a message from her brother, Mark Moreau. "Hey sis, you okay? Haven't heard from you in a while. Amelie's out running errands. Are you two meeting for lunch or something?" Elena's breath caught. Mark had no idea. His wife was tangled in a high-stakes mess with Julian, and he was completely unaware. The weight of that realization settled heavily on her. She couldn't bear for Mark to find out the wrong way. If he had to know, it needed to come from her when she was ready. She quickly typed back, "I'm okay. Let's catch up soon, promise." Then, without hesitation, she dialed her best friend, Clara Monroe, who was still waiting for her at brunch. The phone rang twice before Clara answered, her voice light and teasing. "Elena, where are you? I've been sipping coffee alone for half an hour." Elena swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Hey, sorry, something came up. I'm not gonna make it." I just need someone to talk to." Clara immediately picked up on the distress in Elena's voice. "You sound upset. Are you okay? Where are you?" Elena exhaled shakily. "I'm outside the city, near Willow Bluff. Can you come?" There was no hesitation. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just hang tight, honey." The wait felt endless, but soon Clara's green sedan appeared in the distance. Clara had been Elena's best friend since college, a fiercely loyal, no-nonsense woman with a flair for the dramatic. She stepped out of the car, the wind catching her curly auburn hair as she rushed toward Elena. "What happened?" she asked, concern etched across her face. Elena opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she burst into tears. Clara pulled her into a tight embrace, letting her cry, offering the silent comfort only a best friend could. For a moment, Elena allowed herself to break, to let go of the unbearable weight pressing down on her. Finally, she pulled back, wiping at her cheeks. Then, in a trembling voice, she recounted everything. The forgotten phone, walking in on Julian and Amelie, the cryptic explanation about dangerous investors and buried family secrets. Clara's expression darkened. "That's insane," she murmured. "But do you believe them?" Elena hesitated. "Part of me does. It's not like Julian to lie to me, but I can't shake the way they look together. I keep hearing Amelie's words, 'You can't keep doing this. What if Elena finds out?' That doesn't sound like two people worried about gangsters or old contracts." Clara pursed her lips. "Could it be something else? Like hush money? Or blackmail? That would explain the secrecy too." Elena's stomach churned. Every possibility felt worse than the last. Clara grabbed her hands. "Listen to me. You need clarity. You have to figure out the truth, for your own sake and the baby's. If there's really some criminal threat, you deserve to know exactly what's going on. And if Julian is cheating..." The word cheating felt like a physical blow. Elena's chest tightened, but she forced herself to nod. "How do I find out?" "You dig deeper," Clara said firmly. "Confront Amelie directly. Ask to see these files Julian mentioned. If they're telling the truth, they should have no problem proving it. And maybe it wouldn't hurt to clue Mark in. He might have already noticed something off with Amelie. A new determination flared in Elena's eyes. "You're right. I need evidence, one way or another." They sat there for another hour, piecing together possibilities, Clara offering unwavering support. She even suggested Elena stay at her apartment for a night if she needed space. By the time Elena got back into her car, her mind was clear. She would go home, her home, and demand the truth. She needed to see everything, every last detail, and if by chance Julian and Amelie were lying, she would find out. Elena returned to the penthouse that afternoon, her heart pounding as she unlocked the front door. Was Julian still here? Had Amelie left? The foyer was dimly lit, eerily quiet. She stepped inside cautiously. Almost immediately, Julian appeared from the living room, relief washing over his face. "Elena," he exhaled, his voice unsteady. "I've been calling you." She ignored him. "Is Amelie still here?" He shook his head. "She left soon after you did. She was upset. I told her to go home and talk to Mark, but she said she needed time to prepare herself." Elena sighed, setting her purse down. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she pushed through it. "Let's talk. In your office." She didn't want to do this in the open living room, where the morning's chaos had unraveled. Julian nodded, leading the way to his study, a sleek space encased in glass, overlooking the city skyline. The room was impeccably curated. Leather-bound books lined the shelves, framed accolades hung on the walls, and at the center of it all stood a large wooden desk, one that had once belonged to his father. Elena sank into a leather chair. Julian sat across from her, back straight, his hands steepled together. For a moment, he looked every bit the composed businessman he was known to be, except for the worry creasing his brow. "I want to see the files," Elena said, keeping her voice steady. "Everything about your father's past deals, everything that involves Amelie's father, Richard Moreau. I want to see it. Right here, right now." A flicker of something, maybe relief, crossed Julian's face. "Of course." He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick black binder stuffed with documents. "Some of it is digital," he admitted, setting the binder on the desk, "but this is everything I've compiled so far." Elena's pulse quickened as she took the binder, her fingers tightening around the cover. Page by page, she flipped through old letters, legal agreements, bank statements, fragments of a story buried in secrecy. Many references were cryptic. Then something stood out. A project named Albatross, a joint venture partially funded by Sinclair Enterprises and Moreau Financial Group. Several pages detailed suspicious wire transfers, money funneled through offshore accounts, transactions designed to be hidden. Her breath hitched. Julian tapped a photograph paper clipped to one of the documents. "That's my father, Elliot Sinclair, and Richard Moreau," he murmured, "on what looks like a construction site." "I found this in a sealed box," Julian murmured, flipping to another document. There was a note with it, something about funneling money to the wrong people to push the project forward. There are references to extortion attempts. It's messy. Elena studied the photograph clipped to the page. A chill ran down her spine. The men in the picture, Elliot Sinclair and Richard Moreau, were smiling, but their postures were rigid, tense. And the so-called construction site behind them? It looked more like an abandoned lot than anything legitimate. "This could be incriminating," she said, scanning the documents. Her mind raced. If someone was blackmailing Julian, they must have had more damning evidence. So whoever is threatening you, they have more than this. Julian nodded grimly. Exactly. They've hinted at something bigger, something that could sink Sinclair Enterprises completely if it gets out. If I don't comply, they want money funneled into new investments, which is probably just a cover for laundering. If I refuse, he trailed off. A heavy silence settled between them. Elena swallowed hard. They could go public. Or worse, Julian admitted. A cold dread settled in her stomach. "And Amelie?" she asked. "She's connected because her father was involved in all of this?" Julian leaned forward, his voice low. "Yes, they might think she knows something. Maybe she has missing pieces of the puzzle, or access to hidden accounts. That's why she's terrified." Elena inhaled deeply, trying to stay rational. The evidence in front of her supported Julian and Amelie's claims. Their story made sense, but she couldn't erase the image of their closeness. The way Amelie's hand had rested on Julian's chest, the way he hadn't pulled away. "What about this morning?" she asked finally, her voice sharp. "I walked in on her touching you. and you holding her. And I heard her say, "You can't keep doing this." Julian's jaw tightened. A flicker of frustration crossed his face before he let out a slow exhale. "She was scared," he said. "She meant I couldn't keep handling this recklessly. She was afraid I'd go after the blackmailers on my own, putting everyone in danger. She was trying to warn me to stop acting without telling you and Mark." Elena clenched her fists. "She was worried I'd misunderstand?" "Yes," Julian said quietly, "because she knew how it would look." The explanation was plausible, and yet doubt still gnawed at her. "I need to talk to Amelie directly," she said, "and I need to know you're not hiding anything else from me." Julian met her gaze, his expression heavy with regret. "I'm not lying," he said softly. "I'm sorry you found out this way. I should have told you sooner. But I swear, my feelings for you haven't changed. I only want to protect you, and our baby." Julian's voice wavered at the end, and Elena sensed genuine remorse. She closed the binder, pressing her lips together. "Let's assume I believe you. For now." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Where does that leave us with the blackmailers? And where does Amelie stand in all of this?" Julian reached out, covering her hand with his. For a moment, she let him. The warmth of his skin was familiar, grounding. "We need a plan," he said. "I've hired a private investigation firm, Sparrow Security. They're discreet. They're tracking the blackmailers' communications, trying to identify who's behind this. As soon as we have a name, we can figure out how to stop them." Elena's heart pounded. The idea of more danger made her stomach twist. "And Amelie?" Julian sighed. "She wants to tell Mark the truth, but she's terrified. She knows he'll be furious that she kept secrets from him." He hesitated, before adding, "I told her she doesn't have a choice. We can't fight this alone anymore." Elena nodded, exhaustion washing over her again. "It's probably the right thing to do." A quiet moment passed before Julian spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Elena, I'm so sorry for everything. I love you. I love the future we're building. Please believe that." She looked into his eyes and for the first time in hours saw the man she had fallen in love with. For a fleeting second, the walls she had built around her heart softened. "I don't know how to move forward, Julian," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll try. For our baby." He pulled her into a gentle embrace. She allowed it, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heartbeat. But was it enough? Could she erase the image of Amelie's hand on him so easily? Only time and truth would tell. The next morning, Elena woke to find Julian already gone, off to an early meeting with Sparrow Security. She fixed herself a light breakfast, ginger tea and crackers to ease the lingering nausea, and tried to keep her mind from spinning. A text from Amelie sat on her phone. "Can we meet?" "Privately." Elena hesitated before replying. "Okay." She set the meeting for the afternoon, choosing a small cafe near her old neighborhood. It was tucked away, far from Sinclair Enterprises and any place Mark would usually be. If someone was following Amelie, at least the location would be unpredictable. At exactly 2 o'clock, Elena slipped into a corner booth in the back. The cafe was simple, the kind of place she had frequented in college. Wooden tables, a chalkboard menu, the air rich with the scent of espresso. She sipped chamomile tea, scanning the door. A few minutes later, Amelie walked in. Amelie wore a simple sweater and jeans, her face devoid of its usual polish. She looked tired, vulnerable. When she spotted Elena, she offered a small, hesitant smile. Elena nodded, allowing her to slide into the booth across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Amelie's fingers toyed nervously with the sugar packets on the table, eyes cast downward. Finally, she looked up, unshed tears glistening. "Thank you for meeting me." Elena forced a polite smile. "I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt, but I'm still upset, and I'm not sure I can trust you." Amelie flinched. "I understand. I never wanted to hurt you or cause problems, but I was desperate." Elena leaned forward. "I've seen the files." Julian explained the blackmail. "He showed me documents about your father's partnership with Elliot Sinclair. I believe there's danger, but I need to ask." Her voice sharpened. "Is that all that's going on between you and Julian?" Amelie's eyes widened. "What else would there be?" Elena's jaw tightened. "I walked in on you two in a moment that looked intimate. Are you sure your feelings never crossed a line?" Amelie recoiled as if struck. "Elena, no, I swear. I love Mark. I went to Julian because of my father's letter, and things got tense. I was on the brink of a panic attack. Julian was trying to calm me down. That's all. You have to believe me." Elena studied Amelie's face. The raw anguish in her expression seemed real. But then, there was still that moment, those words. "Then explain why you said, you can't keep doing this. What if Elena finds out?" Her tone was edged with skepticism. "That doesn't sound like a panic attack. That sounds like an affair." A deep blush crept up Amelie's cheeks. "It does, doesn't it?" she murmured. "But I meant Julian couldn't keep sneaking around behind your back, investigating these blackmailers on his own. I was terrified it would blow up in his face, and if you found out everything so abruptly, well, exactly what happened would happen. You'd think we were having an affair." Elena exhaled slowly. The explanation matched what Julian had told her. Still, trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt in a single conversation. She tapped a finger against the rim of her teacup, considering. "Have you told Mark yet?" she asked quietly. Amelie's face fell. She dropped her gaze, shoulders curling inward. "I was planning to last night, but when I got home, he was distracted." "Some work crisis," Amelie muttered. "He was already stressed, and I couldn't drop this on him out of nowhere. But I know I have to tell him soon. I can't keep lying." Elena's gaze remained firm. "Good, because he deserves to know, and you can't expect me to keep this secret much longer." A waitress approached, placing a mug of coffee in front of Amelie, who had pre-ordered. She murmured a quiet thank you before stirring absent-mindedly. The tension between them hung thick in the air. Even if they were telling the truth, the emotional toll was undeniable. Amelie hesitated before speaking again, her voice soft. "Elena, I really am sorry. I wish I could change how you found out. I never wanted to come between you and Julian. I think the world of both of you. You've always treated me like family." Her eyes shone with unshed tears. "I would never betray that." Elena exhaled slowly, feeling something inside her loosen. "Just a little. I believe you." She was surprised by how much she meant it. "But from now on, no more secrets. If there's a threat to our family, we need to work together. Me, Julian, Mark, and you." Amelie nodded vigorously, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Agreed." They sat in a fragile truce, sipping their drinks as they exchanged details about the blackmailers. Amelie described strange phone calls, cars lingering near her home, cryptic notes referencing her father. Elena, in turn, shared what Julian had told her about Sparrow Security's ongoing investigation. Both women acknowledged that the situation was dangerous and unpredictable. But by the time they parted ways, a cautious optimism emerged. Maybe, if they stuck together, they could get through this. Still, doubt lingered in Elena's heart. Because trust, once shattered, is never easily rebuilt. The next week was a blur of tension and clandestine meetings. Julian spent long hours coordinating with Sparrow Security, who had traced some of the blackmail communications to an offshore account. They suspected a small but ruthless organization of financial criminals with ties to Sinclair Enterprises' past projects. Amelie, after several tearful conversations, finally confessed everything to Mark. His reaction was a volatile mix of anger, fear, and protectiveness, especially when he learned that his wife had sought help from Julian behind his back. But Mark had always been fiercely loyal to both Elena and Amelie, and once his initial anger cooled, his focus shifted to protecting them. Still, the stress of it all weighed heavily on Elena. Pregnancy was already demanding enough, and stress, she knew, could make things worse. Her doctor's words echoed in her mind. Rest. Avoid emotional overload. But how could she rest when everything around her was falling apart? Yet how could she rest when her family's future was under siege? One afternoon, Elena allowed herself a rare moment of normalcy, browsing through baby clothes at a quiet boutique. She imagined holding her child, dressing them in soft pastel onesies. For just a fleeting instant, she felt peace. Then her phone vibrated, snapping her back to reality. Clara's name flashed on the screen. "Elena, I just heard from Mark," Clara said, urgency lacing her voice. "Someone tried to break into Amelie's car last night." Elena's stomach clenched. "What? Is she okay?" "She's shaken up. Mark took her to the police to file a report. He's worried. I'm worried. And you need to be careful too." Elena swallowed hard. "I had no idea. No one told me." Clara sighed. "I think Mark didn't want to scare you, considering everything, but this is serious." Elena promised she would be careful, but a cold dread had already settled over her. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. Whoever was behind the threats was escalating. She rushed home, her mind spiraling with worst-case scenarios. Julian arrived late that evening, tension written in every rigid line of his body. He loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water, his jaw tight. Elena set aside the pregnancy book she'd been half reading. "What did you find out?" Julian hesitated, then leaned against the counter. "Sparrow Security has identified a person of interest." Elena's pulse quickened. "Who?" "Brian Fang." She frowned. "Who is he?" "An international financier with a notorious reputation," Julian explained grimly. "He's been linked to money laundering rings in Asia and Eastern Europe. We think he had dealings with my father and Richard Moreau years ago." Elena felt a chill creep down her spine. "And now," Julian's jaw tensed, "now he wants to use Sinclair Enterprises as a front to expand his criminal network." The weight of his words settled heavily between them. "So he's threatening you because you won't cooperate?" Julian nodded. "And it's personal. His father was imprisoned for fraud, and he blames my father for testifying against him. We suspect Fang is behind the break-ins, the intimidation, everything." Elena's hands curled into fists. "What do we do?" Julian set his glass down and walked toward her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. "Sparrow Security has eyes on him. They believe he'll be at a private auction next week, a place where illegal deals happen behind closed doors." Elena swallowed hard. "And?" "We might be able to confront him discreetly," Julian said, "or gather enough evidence to turn over to the authorities." Her chest tightened. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," Julian exhaled, his expression dark with resolve. "But it might be our best shot at shutting this down. If we can prove Fang is behind the blackmail and intimidation, the police can intervene. We won't have to keep living in fear." Julian's voice was calm, but the fire in his eyes was unmistakable. Elena studied his face, etched with determination. "You're not going alone," she said firmly. Julian exhaled. "Elena." "No," she cut him off. "I'm carrying your child. I have as much stake in this as you do, and I won't sit back while you put yourself in danger without knowing exactly what's happening. At least let me be part of the planning." His jaw tightened, but after a moment, he sighed and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "All right," he conceded. "But please, let the security team handle the confrontation. I can't lose you or the baby." She rested her head against his chest, the weight of it all pressing heavily on her. "We do this together," she whispered. "No more secrets." He nodded solemnly. "Together." The following week passed in a blur of planning and whispered conversations. Mark refused to be left out, determined to protect both Amelie and their family. Amelie, still shaken from the attempted break-in, clung to Mark's support, but agreed to stay out of direct involvement. Sparrow Security set up a sting operation. Julian secured an invitation to the private auction, held at an opulent estate owned by one of Fang's associates. The plan was simple, but dangerous. Julian would attend under the guise of exploring new investment opportunities, while Sparrow's undercover agents recorded incriminating conversations or transactions. Once they had solid evidence, they would turn everything over to the authorities. Elena insisted on being nearby. The estate had multiple wings, and Sparrow arranged for her to stay in a monitored room with a security agent, ready to call the police if anything went wrong. Mark and Amelie agreed to remain on standby, waiting for updates. Tension crackled in the air as the night of the auction arrived. Julian adjusted the cuffs of his tailored black tuxedo, his expression unreadable. Elena smoothed a hand over the fabric of her gown, loose-fitting, elegant, chosen to accommodate her growing belly. Her hair was pinned in a sleek chignon, but despite the poised appearance, her pulse thrummed wildly beneath her skin. The estate loomed ahead, a sprawling mansion surrounded by towering hedges and guarded by silent, watchful men. Inside the grand foyer, Julian turned to her, his grip firm as he squeezed her hand. "Stay with the security detail. Don't leave the room without them." She nodded, but as he walked away, a chilling thought settled over her. What if he didn't come back? "Okay," Elena nodded, her heart pounding. "Be careful." Julian offered a reassuring smile before stepping into the crowd of high-profile guests. Elena let herself be guided by a Sparrow security agent named Ronald, who led her to a discreet lounge area. The room was tastefully furnished. Plush chairs arranged around a low table, a wide window overlooking manicured gardens. Against one wall, several monitors displayed silent feeds from hidden cameras placed throughout the estate. Elena's gaze locked onto Julian on one of the screens. He moved smoothly through the main gallery, his expression calm as he mingled with men in dark suits and women draped in glittering gowns. Each minute dragged, her patience wearing thin. She prayed this would end quickly, that Fang would reveal himself, that they could gather the evidence and leave safely. Then, on one of the monitors, she saw him. A tall man with slicked-back hair approached Julian, his demeanor commanding. Ronald zoomed in on the feed. "That's Brian Fang." Elena's chest tightened. On the screen, Julian greeted Fang coolly, shaking his hand. They moved to a side corridor, the camera feed switching to a new angle. Elena clenched her hands in her lap, forcing herself to breathe steadily. The conversation between Julian and Fang looked tense. Fang gestured sharply, jabbing a finger toward Julian's chest. Julian remained composed, nodding occasionally, responding with carefully measured words. Even without audio, Elena could feel the underlying threat. Then, Fang motioned toward a second man, a towering figure standing just behind him. Julian's body language shifted ever so slightly. Elena's heart pounded. She saw Julian lift a hand, as if attempting to defuse the situation, but Fang leaned in aggressively. Ronald murmured into his earpiece. "Team, move in closer. We might need to intercept." But before they could act, the confrontation seemed to ease. Fang shot Julian a final, piercing glare, before turning on his heel and disappearing into the crowd. Julian exhaled, briefly patting the inside of his jacket pocket before returning to the main gallery. He plucked a champagne flute from a passing waiter, feigning interest in the art up for auction, while subtly checking his watch. Elena gripped the arms of her chair. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The evening stretched on, luxury items being auctioned off, rare paintings, antique jewelry, even a vintage car. Fang placed no bids. He simply watched, his gaze darting toward Julian from time to time. Julian, in turn, played his part, placing a bid on a painting, blending in effortlessly with the other elite guests. But Elena's nerves refused to settle. A soft kick from the baby reminded her. This wasn't just about her. She was not alone in this. On the monitor, in the far corner of the screen, Elena spotted Fang discreetly signaling to an associate. Her heart pounded. The man spoke into a phone, then slipped toward the exit. Beside her, Ronald stiffened. This could be trouble. A second later, Elena's phone buzzed. It was a message from Amelie. "Mark just got a strange call from a blocked number. They said if Julian doesn't play ball, we'll all regret it." Elena read the message aloud, her hands trembling. Ronald immediately relayed it to the Sparrow team. "It's time to wrap this up. Julian needs to get out before Fang escalates." The exit plan was simple. Julian would call for his car and slip out quietly once the auction ended. Ronald and Elena would meet him at the driveway. But as the final auction piece was announced, Fang approached Julian again. Elena's breath caught. On the monitor, Fang's expression was cold, calculating. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small flash drive, pressing it into Julian's hand. Elena's stomach twisted. It looked like an exchange. And then, Julian pocketed the drive. She froze, shock rippling through her. Had Julian just accepted a deal? Fang smirked before turning and vanishing into the crowd. Elena barely had time to process before Julian turned to leave. Ronald grabbed her arm. "Let's move." They slipped through a side corridor, emerging into the grand foyer just as Julian arrived. His face was pale, tension clear in his posture. "What happened?" Elena demanded, keeping her voice low. "Did you just—" Julian cut her off, stepping aside with her. "Fang gave me an ultimatum," he said quietly. "That flash drive contains records tying Sinclair Enterprises to illegal deals. If I don't cooperate, he'll release them publicly." Ronald ushered them toward the exit. "We got it all on camera," he assured them. "Fang's threats, the exchange, it's enough to involve law enforcement." Julian exhaled sharply. "Then let's go. I'm done with this place." They hurried to their waiting car. Elena sat beside Julian, her emotions a chaotic swirl of relief, fear, and something darker. Had Julian just pretended to go along with Fang, or was there something more behind that exchange? Within 2 days, Sparrow Security and the police reviewed the auction footage, finding enough to implicate Brian Fang in multiple crimes. Realizing his trap had failed, Fang disappeared into hiding, leaving behind a fresh warrant for his arrest. But despite their victory, one question still haunted Elena. Had she really seen the whole truth? The flash drive Julian had received did in fact expose decades-old deals involving Elliot Sinclair. But it failed to implicate Julian in any current wrongdoing. For the first time in weeks, the Sinclair and Moreau families breathed a little easier, though the relief felt fragile. As Elena and Julian tried to reclaim lost time, rescheduling her postponed baby shower, Mark and Amelie found solace in each other, stronger than ever after confronting the darkest shadows of their family's past. Then, one cold evening, Elena's phone buzzed, an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A woman's voice, sharp, venomous, hissed through the speaker. "We're not finished. Fang may have lost a battle, but he won't lose the war. If Julian doesn't comply, you'll learn true despair." The line went dead. Elena stood frozen, the room spinning around her. The danger wasn't over. Her unborn child's future was still under threat. Julian entered the room and found her trembling, the phone still clutched in her hand. When she repeated the warning, fire flashed in his eyes. He pulled her into a protective embrace. "Let them try," he murmured. "We'll fight back, together." Despite the lingering fear, Elena held on to one thing: hope. Whatever darkness lurked in the Sinclair family's past, she vowed that love and the relentless drive to protect her child would outlast any threat. And in that quiet moment, their family bond proved stronger than fear, uniting them for the battle yet to come. And so we conclude this heart-pounding tale of family secrets, unexpected alliances, and a pregnant wife's fight to protect her child, while unraveling a twisted conspiracy. Elena Moreau Sinclair's love, courage, and unwavering determination carried her through deception, betrayal, and heartache, ultimately strengthening her bond with her billionaire husband, Julian, and bringing her sister-in-law, Amelie, back from the shadows. While dark forces still loom, threatening all they cherish, Elena's steadfast resolve proves that even in the most turbulent storms, the power of family loyalty and hope will always shine through. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, craving more of Elena's journey, this is just the beginning. Don't forget to hit that like button, share the story with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more breathtaking drama, heart-wrenching confrontations, and shocking twists. Your support keeps these stories alive. So stay tuned for our next thrilling tale.